The night was quiet as Tom finished mopping the last hallway of the tall office building downtown. The clock on the wall showed it was already past midnight. His shoulders ached from a long day of work, but he couldn't stop yet. This was his 5th year as a janitor at Lincoln Tower, home to some of the city's biggest companies. Tom pushed his cleaning cart toward the elevator, thinking about getting home to his small apartment where his mom would be waiting up, despite his many requests for her to get proper rest. She always worried about him working so late. As he reached the main elevator bank, something caught his eye. A dark object sitting alone on the shiny floor. Tom moved closer and saw it was a wallet, an expensive-looking leather one that seemed out of place against the cold marble. "Hello," Tom called out, looking around the empty lobby. His voice echoed back at him. Everyone had gone home hours ago. He picked up the wallet carefully. It was heavy and made of soft, high-quality leather that probably cost more than what he earned in a week. Tom opened it and found several crisp $100 bills. He counted quickly, almost $2,000 in cash. "Wow," he whispered to himself, his heart beating faster. Behind the money, Tom found a driver's license with the name Richard Harrington, CEO of Harrington Enterprises. Tom recognized the name immediately. Harrington was the big boss whose company took up the top 3 floors of the building. People talked about him all the time, how he'd built his company from nothing, how he now had millions, maybe billions. For a brief moment, Tom thought about the money. $2,000 would help a lot with his mom's medicine. The hospital bills had been piling up for months now, and his second job at the convenience store barely made a dent in them. His night classes in computer programming were another expense he struggled to cover. But the thought passed quickly. Tom had been raised to do the right thing, no matter what. His mom had always told him, "Your character is built by what you do when nobody's watching." Tom slipped the wallet into his pocket and wheeled his cart to the security desk. "Hey, Ray," Tom called to the night security guard, who was halfway through his sandwich. "Found something important." Ray looked up, surprised. "What you got there, Tom?" "Mr. Harrington's wallet. It was by the elevators. Has a lot of cash in it." Ray's eyebrows shot up. "You're kidding. The boss himself, huh? Let me call this in." While Ray made the call, Tom noticed something else in the wallet, a small photo tucked behind the credit cards. It showed an older woman with a warm smile, standing next to Mr. Harrington. On the back, written in fading ink, "Mom, always my guiding star." Tom smiled sadly. He understood that feeling all too well. There was also a small USB drive in one of the wallet pockets. Tom figured it must contain important business files. All the more reason to return everything safely. "They want you to drop it in the lost and found box," Ray said, hanging up the phone. "They'll deal with it tomorrow." Tom shook his head. "Nah, I'll bring it up myself in the morning. Too important to just leave in a box." As Tom finally left the building an hour later, the night air felt cool against his tired face. His bus was late as usual, giving him time to think. He imagined Mr. Harrington's reaction when he got his wallet back with everything still inside. Would he be surprised? Would he even notice who returned it? It didn't really matter. Tom knew he'd done the right thing. As he finally boarded the nearly empty bus, he couldn't help but wonder what it would be like to be someone like Richard Harrington, with so much money that losing $2,000 might not even matter. Little did Tom know that his simple act of honesty would set in motion events that would change his life forever. By this time tomorrow, nothing would be the same. The next morning, Tom woke up earlier than usual. He hadn't slept well, thinking about the wallet tucked safely in his dresser drawer. His mom was already in the kitchen, making breakfast despite her obvious pain. "You should be resting, Ma," Tom said, gently touching her shoulder. "The doctor said." "I know what the doctor said," she replied with a tired smile. "But my boy needs to eat before work." Tom helped her sit down and took over making the eggs. As they ate, he told her about finding Mr. Harrington's wallet. His mother nodded approvingly. "You did right, son. Always do right." "Yeah, but $2,000, May. That's 3 months of your medicine." She reached across and squeezed his hand. "Money that's not earned honestly never brings happiness. Remember that." Tom arrived at the building an hour before his shift. He wore his only button-up shirt under his usual jacket. It was wrinkled from sitting at the back of his closet, but it looked better than his work clothes. The morning receptionist, Dina, raised her eyebrows at his appearance. "Big date after work?" she teased. Tom shook his head. "Need to see Mr. Harrington. Found his wallet last night." Dinah's eyes widened. "Mr. Harrington doesn't see just anyone, Tom. You need an appointment, and those are booked months ahead. Can you at least call up? Tell them I have his wallet." Dina hesitated, then picked up her phone. After a brief conversation, she looked surprised. "Well, I'll be. His assistant says to send you right up." The elevator ride to the 30th floor seemed to take forever. Tom had never been this high in the building before. His cleaning route only went up to the 20th floor. Another team handled the executive levels. The doors opened to reveal a world completely different from the floors below. Soft carpet, real paintings on the walls, and a quietness that spoke of serious money. A woman in a neat suit approached him. "You must be Tom," she said. "I'm Liz, Mr. Harrington's assistant. He's waiting for you." Tom followed her through a large office area where people typed at computers or spoke quietly on phones. They all glanced at him as he passed, probably wondering who this obviously out-of-place person was. Liz knocked on a large wooden door, then opened it. "Sir, this is Tom Chen from Building Services. He has your wallet." The office was huge, with windows all around showing views of the entire city. Mr. Harrington stood up from behind a desk that looked bigger than Tom's entire kitchen. He was tall, with gray hair and a face that had been on local business magazines. He wasn't smiling, but he didn't look angry either. "So you're the one who found my wallet," he said, his voice deep and clear. Tom stepped forward, pulling the wallet from his jacket pocket. "Yes, sir. Everything's still in it. I counted the money so you know. It's all there. And the USB drive too." Mr. Harrington took the wallet, opening it to check inside. He looked back at Tom with an expression that was hard to read. "Do you know what most people would have done with $2,000 in cash and no cameras watching?" Tom shrugged slightly. "Doesn't matter what others would do, sir." Mr. Harrington studied him for a moment. "I offered the last person who returned something valuable to me a reward. She took it immediately." "I'm not looking for a reward," Tom said. "Just doing what's right." "Everyone wants something," Mr. Harrington insisted, reaching for his checkbook. "Name your price." Tom thought about his mother's medical bills, about his tuition fees coming due, but something inside him stood firm. "No thank you, sir. I should get to work now. They'll dock my pay if I'm late." As Tom turned to leave, Mr. Harrington called out, "Wait. At least tell me why. Why didn't you just keep it?" Tom paused at the door. "My ma always says character is what you do when nobody's watching. Have a good day, Mr. Harrington." As Tom rode the elevator back down, he never imagined that his simple answer had just set something enormous in motion, something that would change everything by this time tomorrow. After Tom left his office, Richard Harrington stood by the window, turning the wallet over in his hands. Something about the young janitor bothered him. In 30 years of business, he'd met thousands of people, most of them wanting something from him. But this one seemed different. "Liz," he called to his assistant, "find out everything you can about that young man." "The janitor, sir?" she asked, surprised. "Yes. I want to know his full name, how long he's worked here, his background, everything." Richard sat back at his desk. "And clear my afternoon schedule." Liz nodded, though she looked confused. Richard didn't explain further. He rarely did. Later that day, as Tom cleaned the restrooms on the 14th floor, his phone buzzed. It was his second boss from the convenience store. "Hey, can you come in early tonight?" Pete called in sick again. Tom sighed. He'd already worked 8 hours, and his computer class started at 7. "I can come at 9, after my class." "Not good enough. I need you at 6. Tom closed his eyes. He needed both jobs. What if I skip class just this once? Be here at 6 or don't bother coming back at all. The line went dead. Tom leaned against the wall, feeling the weight of everything pressing down. His mom's medication had gone up again. The electric bill was overdue. And now his class, the one thing that might someday get him out of this cycle. He finished his shift at 4, grabbed a quick sandwich, and headed to the community college to explain to his teacher why he'd missed tonight's important lesson. Meanwhile, in his top-floor office, Richard Harrington was looking at a file Liz had compiled. Tom Chen, 29 years old. 5 years at Lincoln Tower Building Services. Before that, 4 years at City Hospital, also as a janitor. High school diploma. Currently enrolled part-time at East Side Community College in computer programming. Mother with chronic illness, lupus, requiring expensive ongoing treatment. He works at Quick Stop convenience store from 6 p.m. to midnight most nights, Liz continued. Then comes here at 8 a.m. According to his supervisor, he's never late, never calls in sick. Richard nodded, his face giving nothing away. What about his performance reviews? Always positive. Building management says he's their most reliable employee, does extra shifts when others call out. Richard glanced at another paper, Tom's pay stub. The amount seemed impossibly small. Where does he live? Apartment on Elm Street, the rent-controlled building. Richard knew the area. It wasn't the worst part of town, but it was close. Get me Jeff Wilson on the phone, Richard said suddenly. Your old college roommate? The one who runs the tech firm? Yes. And after that, I want to speak with someone from Building Services Management. While Richard made his calls, Tom sat in his programming teacher's small office. I understand, Tom, Mr. Patel said kindly. But this is the third class you've missed this month. The final project is coming up. I know, sir. I just can't lose this job. My mom's medicine. Mr. Patel sighed. You're one of my brightest students. It's a shame to see your potential wasted like this. He handed Tom some papers. Here's tonight's lesson. Try to work through it on your own. Thank you, sir. On his way to the convenience store, Tom thought about quitting school. Maybe it was a pipe dream anyway. People like him didn't become computer programmers. They cleaned floors and stocked shelves and were grateful for the work. Back at Lincoln Tower, Richard hung up his phone, a rare smile on his face. Liz, I need one more thing. Find out which bus route Tom Chen takes home. Sir? Just do it, please. By 8 p.m., Richard Harrington, who normally left the office by 6 in his luxury car with his driver, was sitting on a city bus heading toward Elm Street, wearing a plain coat instead of his usual tailored suit. He had one more piece of information to gather, and he wanted to do it himself. What Richard discovered that night would lead to the decision that would shock everyone at Lincoln Tower the very next day. Tom dragged himself into work the next morning, exhausted after pulling a double shift at the convenience store. Someone had tried to rob the place around midnight, and although nothing was stolen, the police reports had kept him there until nearly 3 a.m. He'd managed barely 2 hours of sleep before heading to Lincoln Tower. You look terrible, Ray said as Tom signed in. Rough night, Tom mumbled, too tired to explain. He was halfway through mopping the lobby when Dina called out to him from the reception desk. Tom, phone call for you. A phone call? Nobody ever called him at work. His heart immediately raced. His mother. Is it my mom? Is she okay? He asked, rushing over. Dana shook her head. It's from upstairs. The executive floor. Confused, Tom took the phone. Hello. Mr. Chen, came the crisp voice of Liz, Mr. Harrington's assistant. Your presence is requested on the 30th floor immediately. But I'm in the middle of. Your supervisor has been informed. Please come up now. The line went dead. Tom looked at Dina, who seemed just as puzzled. What did you do? She whispered. No idea, Tom replied, his tired mind racing through possibilities. Maybe Mr. Harrington had discovered something missing from his wallet after all. But that was impossible. Tom hadn't taken anything. The elevator ride seemed even longer than yesterday. This time, when the doors opened, not only was Liz waiting, but also a man in a suit Tom didn't recognize, along with his direct supervisor, Bill. What's going on? Tom asked. Bill looked uncomfortable. Just go with Ms. Reynolds here. Everything's fine. Tom followed Liz down a different hallway than yesterday, ending up in a conference room rather than Mr. Harrington's office. Inside, Richard Harrington sat at the head of a long table. 3 other people in business attire were there too. Mr. Chen, please have a seat, Richard said, gesturing to an empty chair. Tom sat down cautiously, acutely aware of his janitor's uniform and the dark circles under his eyes. Everyone was looking at him. Do you know why you're here? Richard asked. Tom shook his head. No, sir. If there was a problem with the wallet. The wallet is fine, Richard cut him off. That's not why I asked you here. One of the strangers, a woman with glasses, slid a folder across the table toward Tom. "Last night," Richard continued, "I took an unusual step. I rode the bus to your neighborhood. I wanted to see for myself where you lived, how you lived." Tom's face flushed with embarrassment. The idea of this millionaire seeing his run-down apartment building made him want to sink through the floor. "I also spoke with several people," Richard went on. "Your convenience store manager, who called you the hardest worker he's ever had. Your programming teacher, Mr. Patel, who says you have remarkable talent. And I visited your mother." Tom's head snapped up. "You went to see my mom?" Richard nodded. "She's quite proud of you. Showed me all your certificates from school. Told me how you've been taking care of her since you were 19 when she first got sick." Tom didn't know what to say. This felt like some strange dream. "Mr. Chen and Tom, I've owned businesses for 30 years. In that time, I've learned that there are two things that matter most: integrity and potential. You have both in abundance." Richard leaned forward. "The folder in front of you contains a job offer. Department, starting salary 3 times what you make now, full benefits including health insurance that will cover your mother's condition completely." Tom stared at the folder, not daring to open it. "But why?" he finally managed. "Because talent should be rewarded, because honesty should be valued, and because I've been looking for someone exactly like you." Richard gestured to one of the strangers. "This is Jeff Wilson, an old friend who runs a tech firm. He'll be overseeing your training. This is Paula Martinez, our HR director, who will handle your paperwork. And this is Dr. Lee, who heads our medical team and will coordinate your mother's care." Tom slowly opened the folder, seeing numbers that made his hands shake. "This can't be real," he whispered. Richard stood up. "It's very real. You start tomorrow, if you accept, of course." The room fell silent, all eyes on Tom. His life before him suddenly split into 2 paths, the one he'd been walking, and an entirely new one he never even dared to imagine. The weeks that followed felt like a dream to Tom. He'd accepted the job offer, of course. How could he not? But the reality of his new life took time to sink in. His first day, he'd arrived wearing the same button-up shirt he'd worn to return the wallet. By lunchtime, a package had arrived at his desk: 3 new shirts, 2 pairs of slacks, and a note that simply read, "For a fresh start, RH." That night, he'd gone home to tell his mother everything. She'd listened quietly, tears streaming down her face. "I told you," she'd said, squeezing his hand. "Good things come to good people. They just take their time sometimes." Within a month, Tom and his mother moved from their cramped apartment to a nice 2-bedroom place closer to the office. The medical team had arranged for his mother to see specialists she could never have afforded before. For the first time in years, she was getting better instead of worse. "I don't understand why you're doing all this," Tom had said to Richard one day after a training session. Richard had looked at him thoughtfully. "Have you ever planted a garden, Tom?" "No, sir. Never had the space." "I do. Every spring. Some seeds sprout easily, grow fast. Others need more care, more time. But often it's those slow-growing ones that produce the most impressive results." Richard had patted Tom's shoulder. "I'm just making sure you have the right soil and enough sunlight." Now, 6 weeks into his new job, Tom sat at his desk in the department, working through a security problem that had stumped the rest of the team. His programming classes had given him a foundation, but the intensive training provided by Jeff Wilson had built on that rapidly. "How's it coming?" asked Ben, his team leader. "I think I found the issue," Tom replied, pointing to his screen. "The firewall exception is creating a backdoor." Ben leaned over, his eyes widening. "Dan, you're right. The whole security team missed that." He straightened up. "I'm putting your name on the report. Mr. Harrington will want to know who caught this." Tom still wasn't used to the idea that his work mattered, that people listened to him. In the janitorial department, he'd been practically invisible. During lunch, he met with Dr. Lee about his mother's treatment. "The new medication is working," the doctor said. "Her inflammation markers are down significantly." "I can't thank you enough," Tom said. "She's been able to cook again, even took a short walk yesterday." Dr. Lee smiled. "Don't thank me. This is what proper healthcare looks like. Everyone deserves it." Later that afternoon, Tom was called to Richard's office. This time, he walked in with confidence, no longer feeling out of place. "Tom," Richard greeted him. "Have a seat. I heard about the security issue you found. Excellent work." "Thank you, sir." Richard slid a piece of paper across his desk. "Your performance review. 6 weeks is early, but the feedback from your team has been exceptional." Tom looked at the paper. His salary was being increased again, and there was mention of a bonus. "This is too much," Tom said honestly. Richard shook his head. "It's exactly what you've earned." As Tom left the office, he passed Liz, who gave him a genuine smile. When he'd first started, some employees had been cold, assuming he'd gotten the job through some fluke or connection, but as they'd seen his work, that had changed. On his way out that evening, Tom stopped by the janitor's closet on the 14th floor. Bill was there, checking supplies. "Hey, stranger," Bill said warmly. "Look at you in your fancy clothes." Tom smiled. "Just wanted to say hi. How's everyone down here?" Same old, same old. Ray misses your chess games during breaks." "Tell him I'll stop by next week," Tom promised. As he walked to the bus stop, he could afford a car now, but old habits died hard. Tom thought about how much had changed in such a short time. His mother was getting better. He was doing work he loved. He had a future now. What amazed him most wasn't the money or the job title. It was the fact that someone had seen value in him when he couldn't see it himself. 6 months after Tom started his new job, Harrington Enterprises held its annual company gathering at a fancy hotel downtown. Everyone from executives to entry-level employees attended, dressed in their best clothes. Tom wore a new suit, his first ever, that his mother had insisted on buying him now that she was well enough to go shopping. "You clean up nice," Ben said, handing Tom a glass of sparkling water. Tom didn't drink alcohol, something his co-workers had learned to respect. "Thanks," Tom replied, still feeling a bit out of place among the elegant decorations and well-dressed people. "Have you seen Mr. Harrington tonight?" "Not yet, but there's a rumor he's making some big announcement." The evening progressed with dinner and casual conversation. Tom sat at a table with his 8 team members who were discussing weekend plans and sports. He'd grown comfortable with them over the months, but still found himself observing more than participating. Around 9 o'clock, Richard Harrington stepped onto a small stage at the front of the room. The crowd quickly fell silent. "Good evening, everyone," Richard began. "Thank you for another exceptional year. Harrington Enterprises has hit record profits, expanded into 3 new markets, and been named one of the top places to work in the city." Applause filled the room. Richard waited for it to die down before continuing. "Tonight, I want to share something personal, something that might surprise many of you." His eyes scanned the crowd and found Tom. "I'd like to ask Tom Chen to join me up here." A murmur rippled through the audience. Tom felt his cheeks grow warm as all eyes turned to him. "Go on," Ben encouraged, giving him a gentle push. Tom made his way to the stage, his heart pounding. What was happening? Had he done something wrong? For those who don't know him, Richard continued as Tom approached. "Tom joined our department 6 months ago and has quickly become one of our most valuable team members. But that's not why I've called him up here." Richard put a hand on Tom's shoulder. "What many of you don't know is the story of how Tom came to work for us. It begins with a wallet, my wallet, to be exact." Over the next few minutes, Richard recounted finding his wallet missing and how Tom had returned it with everything intact. The audience listened attentively. "But here's what I haven't told anyone until now," Richard said, his voice growing more serious. "That wallet wasn't lost by accident." Tom turned to look at him, confused. "For the past 15 years, I've been conducting what you might call a character test. Twice a year, I deliberately leave my wallet somewhere in the building, always with a significant amount of cash, my ID, and sometimes items that appear valuable." The room was completely silent now. In 15 years, 42 people have found that wallet. Only 7 returned it. Of those 7, 3 had removed cash. 2 asked for rewards. 1 returned it to security without checking the contents. Richard looked at Tom. And then there was Tom, who not only returned everything untouched, but refused any reward for doing so. Tom stood there stunned. The wallet had been a test. I've built this company on the belief that character matters more than credentials, Richard continued. That integrity is rarer and more valuable than talent. Tom showed both, which is why I immediately created a position that would use his skills and potential. Richard turned to address the room again. The lesson here is simple. How we act when no one is watching defines who we truly are. Tom thought no one was watching when he found that wallet. He had no idea that his simple act of honesty would change his life. The crowd burst into applause. Some people were standing now. Tom felt overwhelmed by the attention. I share this story tonight, Richard said once the applause quieted, because I'm announcing a new initiative at Harrington Enterprises. Based on Tom's success, we're launching a program to identify and recruit talented individuals who may lack traditional opportunities but possess exceptional character and potential. Richard looked at Tom, and I'm asking Tom to help lead this program with a promotion to Assistant Director of Talent Development. Tom's jaw dropped. Another promotion? After just 6 months. So, Richard said with a smile, "What do you say, Tom? Will you help us find more people like yourself?" The spotlight was literally on Tom now, waiting for his answer. 2 years passed since that night at the company gathering. Tom stood at the window of his new office on the 28th floor, looking out at the city below. Sometimes he still couldn't believe how much his life had changed. He had accepted Richard's offer that night, of course. How could he say no to a chance to help others like himself? The memory of the thunderous applause still made him smile. Knock knock, came a voice from the doorway. Tom turned to see his mother, walking without her cane now, carrying a small plant for his desk. "Mom, you didn't have to come all the way up here," he said, taking the plant. "And Miss Cinny, my son, in his fancy office? Not a chance." She looked around proudly. Director of Talent Development. I still can't believe it. The promotion had come 6 months ago, after the success of the program he'd helped create, New Horizons, they called it. In 2 years, they'd brought in 35 people from backgrounds similar to Tom's, hard-working folks with potential who just needed a chance. "Mr. Harrington wants to see us at 2, Tom reminded her. I know, I'm just early." She sat down on his office couch. His office actually had a couch, and pulled out her knitting. "I'll wait right here." At 2 o'clock sharp, they entered Richard's office. He'd aged a bit in the past 2 years, with more gray in his hair, but his energy remained the same. "Ah, the Chens," he said warmly, standing to greet them. "Please sit down." Richard's assistant brought in tea, and they chatted casually for a few minutes about Tom's mother's improved health and the weather. Then Richard's expression grew more serious. "I asked you both here today because we're about to announce something important, and I wanted you to be the first to know." He slid a glossy folder across the desk. The New Horizons Foundation. Tom opened the folder to find paperwork for a non-profit organization with his and Richard's names listed as co-founders. "I don't understand," Tom said. "We're taking New Horizons beyond Harrington Enterprises," Richard explained. "This foundation will partner with companies across the city, eventually the country, to identify people with exceptional character and potential but limited opportunities. We'll provide education, training, and job placement." Tom's mother squeezed his hand, her eyes filling with tears. "And I want you to run it," Richard continued. "Full-time, with a budget of $5 million to start." Tom stared at him, speechless. $5 million? "Why me?" he finally managed to ask. Richard smiled. "Because you understand both sides. You know what it's like to struggle, to work multiple jobs, to take care of family, and still try to better yourself. But you also know how to succeed in the corporate world now. You speak both languages." Later that evening, Tom visited his old neighborhood. The convenience store where he'd worked was still there, though under new management. He walked past his old apartment building, remembering the leaky faucet and temperamental heating. A young woman was sweeping the sidewalk outside, probably the building's maintenance person. She reminded him of himself from 2 years ago. "Excuse me," Tom said, approaching her. "I used to live here. Do you have a few minutes to talk?" The woman looked suspicious at first, but something in Tom's manner reassured her. Over coffee at the diner across the street, Tom told her about the New Horizons Foundation. He explained the educational opportunities, the mentorship program, the job placement services. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because everyone deserves a chance," Tom replied. "Sometimes life is hard, and we just need someone to open a door for us." As he left the diner, Tom called Richard. "I think I found our first candidate for the foundation," he said. The next day, when Tom arrived at the office, a new dedicated space for the foundation, he found his team already hard at work. Pictures were being hung on the walls, success stories from the company program that would now expand citywide. On his desk sat a small worn leather wallet in a glass display case with a simple inscription: "Sometimes the smallest actions lead to the greatest changes. RH." Tom smiled, thinking of that night 2 years ago when he'd spotted something on the floor by the elevator. How different his life might have been if he'd walked past it, or if he'd made a different choice. One wallet, one moment of honesty, a lifetime of difference.